On August 8, 1998, approximately 37 children from the Dutch village of Heibloem embarked on an exciting summer camp adventure at De Heikoop, a recreational resort nestled in the Brunsummerhede Nature Reserve. What initially promised to be a joyous experience took a tragic turn, as, under the veil of darkness, one of the campers vanished from their tent, transforming every parent's worst fear into a heartbreaking reality. The subsequent day brought the grim discovery of the missing boy's lifeless body in the woods, a victim of a heinous crime committed by a yet unknown assailant. At the age of 11, Nicky Verstappen was characterised by his family and friends as an avid sports enthusiast, displaying a particular passion for football and mountain biking. When not actively engaged outdoors or playing with friends, he found solace in watching his beloved football team, Ajax, on television, rarely ever missing a match. Nicky resided in the quaint southern Dutch village of Heibloem in the Limburg province with his parents, Petja and Bertie, his sister Femke, and the family's golden retriever. The Verstappens were widely recognised as a tight-knit family unit. Despite the close bond, Nicky, uncertain about leaving for summer camp in 1998, harboured concerns about potential homesickness. His apprehensions, particularly missing his family and the family dog during his time away, were shared with his mother. In response, she offered reassurance, affirming that he would undoubtedly have a fantastic experience at camp alongside his best friend, who would also be in attendance. Despite his friend backing out of the camp at last minute, Nicky made the decision to proceed with attending. Upon reaching the campsite, the attendees were organised into smaller groups. Nicky found himself sharing a tent with 4 other boys, aged between 8 and 12, all of whom he was familiar with. The first day at camp was filled with team-building exercises, games, and an evening spent around the campfire exchanging ghost stories. Around 10 p.m, as the camp counsellors and leaders deemed it time to call it a night, the children dispersed to their respective tents for a well-deserved rest. The camp leaders stayed up a while longer until around midnight before heading to sleep. In the early hours of August 10th, at approximately 5 a.m, one of the boys who shared Verstappen's tent awoke, needing to use the bathroom. At this time, all 5 boys were fast asleep in their sleeping bags. However, an hour later, at around 6 a.m, another boy got up to use the facilities and noticed that 11-year-old Nicky was gone. At 8 a.m, the children were summoned for breakfast. However, expressing worry about Nicky's safety, the boys informed the camp leader that they hadn't seen him since around 5 a.m. A thorough search of the campground and the nearby woods yielded no clues regarding Nicky's whereabouts, intensifying concerns for his well-being. Initially, camp leaders suspected that Nicky had wandered off independently, but the truth proved to be far more disturbing. They contacted Verstappen's parents and alerted them of the situation. However, Nicky's mother knew that her son wouldn't have gone off on his own. She knew in her gut that something was deeply wrong. Upon arriving at the campsite, which was approximately a 45-minute drive from their home, Petja and Bertie Verstappen inspected Nicky's tent and immediately noticed something jarring. Their son's shoes were still sitting in the tent, and if he had walked off into the woods, why did he not put his shoes on? They searched the vicinity for their son alongside the camp leaders and counsellors, calling out for Nicky, but to no avail. After failing to locate the 11-year-old, at approximately midday, Dutch authorities were notified of Nicky's disappearance. Upon police arrival at the camp, a comprehensive search of the area ensued, involving camp personnel, local volunteers from nearby towns, and door-to-door inquiries with residents to inquire if anyone had seen Nicky. Despite these concerted efforts, the search, which was conducted during one of the hottest days of that summer, proved fruitless once again. Despite the Verstappens' evident distress, the police did not seem to share the same level of concern. At this juncture, they were convinced that Nicky had simply wandered off and become lost. As nightfall approached, the search efforts were expanded with the involvement of armed forces, aerial teams, and search dogs. However, with nearly 24 hours having passed without locating the schoolboy, camp leaders made the decision to abruptly end the remaining camp activities and sent the children home. The prolonged absence of Nicky raised heightened anxieties, as it prompted contemplation of potential harm befalling him. Even in the scenario of him being lost, concerns arose regarding a child's ability to endure alone in the wilderness. On August 11th, around 9 p.m, one of the searchers, who happened to be Nicky's uncle, made a grim discovery, finding his lifeless body beneath a pine tree in an area used for growing Christmas trees near Lontreaf, approximately 1.2 kilometres away from the camp. Nicky was found without a shirt, wearing only his Ajax football pyjama bottoms and a pair of blue underwear. Notably, the pyjama bottoms were inside out and back to front, suggesting that they had been removed and repositioned. Initial signs pointed to a head injury, though the exact cause of death was yet to be confirmed. The situation had evolved into a murder investigation. Some blood specks were observed on Nicky's pyjama bottoms, but testing at the time only explored one speck sample which matched Nicky's DNA. A notable detail at the scene was the cleanliness of Nicky's feet, indicating that he hadn't walked barefoot when leaving his tent. It was surmised that he had been placed in the pine grove by the perpetrator, suggesting that the abduction and subsequent crime likely occurred elsewhere. The post-mortem examination took place 3 days after Nicky's body was discovered. Unfortunately, the delay was attributed to the unavailability of mortuary pathologists in the vicinity, who were on vacation during that period, leading to a temporary lack of capacity to conduct the autopsy sooner. Compounding the distress, the complete autopsy was not disclosed until 2 months later, presumably due to the extended duration required for a comprehensive toxicology analysis. The finalised report revealed that Nicky had been administered drugs, and his body exhibited indications of sexual assault. Despite the efforts of 2 pathologists conducting the autopsies, neither could definitively determine the exact cause of Verstappen's death. Suffocation was deemed the most probable cause, yet insufficient evidence existed to establish it conclusively. One grim detail of the autopsy was the time of death estimation, which concluded that Nicky had been kept alive for at least 8 hours prior to his death. Numerous questions surfaced in the wake of Nicky's autopsy report. One prominent query was how he could have disappeared and how had he been administered drugs while sleeping in a tent with 4 other boys. Some speculate that he may have been abducted, possibly while en route to the bathroom in the early hours of the morning. However, the lack of witnesses leaves this theory unconfirmed and shrouded in uncertainty. If he had screamed or called for help, why did nobody hear him? In terms of the evidence gathered by the police at the scene, forensics identified several items of significant interest. Among these were a beer bottle top, a cigarette butt, and a tissue containing traces of semen, found about 100 yards away from where Nicky's body was found. Notably, the location where Verstappen's body was discovered had a nearby car park commonly used for sexual activities, so finding items of a sexual nature wouldn't typically raise suspicions. DNA samples were extracted from these 3 items, resulting in the creation of a male DNA profile. Crucially, it was established that the DNA did not match Nicky's profile, but possibly the perpetrator. Around 35 men, including the male camp leaders, gave police DNA swabs to compare to the DNA found at the scene, but no match was found. Police had initially turned towards camp counsellors in regards to suspecting any involvement in Nicky's demise, as it was deemed unlikely that he would have left camp with a stranger. He was already apprehensive about leaving his family behind, and wasn't the kind of boy who would have left with someone he didn't know. All camp leaders were cooperative and were ruled out of having been involved through DNA testing. One individual who raised suspicions among authorities was Jos Barton, the camp's founder and former school principal, aged 80 at the time. Jos had a prior conviction for child sexual abuse dating back to the 1950s, resulting in the loss of his job at the school. Despite this conviction, Jos was allowed to work with children again, and he subsequently found the summer camp and a football club. He admitted to being in the vicinity of Nicky's tent when the boy disappeared, stating that he was assisting another boy with a burn injury around 6 a.m. Subsequently, Jos claimed to have driven from the camp to attend a friend's funeral in High Bloom. It was only later that day that he became aware of Nicky's disappearance. Police found Jos Barton's involvement in directing the search toward the area where Verstappen's body was found suspicious, particularly his emphasis on the existence of the car park. Additionally, his prior conviction for sexual abuse and a claim from a 15-year-old girl who believed Jos had assaulted her in her sleep at the same camp just weeks before Nicky's death raised concerns. Despite these suspicions, neither Jos nor any of the camp leaders were officially considered suspects in the investigation. Jos died in 2003. A reward of 25,000 Gjelders was announced by the Open Bar Ministry in Maastricht for information leading to the identification of the perpetrator. In 1999, this reward was doubled, thanks to funds raised by crime reporter Peter Rudolf de Vries, who subsequently became a spokesperson for the Verstappen family. They managed to raise the reward money for information to 500,000 Gjelders, with the help of anonymous donations from various business owners. Despite the significant amount of money being offered, nobody came forward with any information, and the case subsequently went cold. The case was dissolved, but a new team of investigators and a set of fresh eyes took on the case following the millennium in a newly created task force. Various sex offenders and serial killers were considered as having been involved in the murder over the years. However, there was never any solid proof to indicate that any of them were involved. The Verstappen family bears the enduring weight of guilt for allowing Nicky to attend camp on that fateful day in August of 1998. Nicky Verstappen's funeral was held on August 15th in his hometown of High Bloom, with over 600 people in attendance to support his bereft family. An Ajax football flag was draped over his coffin. A memorial for Nicky was erected in his memory at the site where his body was found in 2001, attended by his grandparents and those affected by the tragedy. Nicky's mother lit a candle every morning for 20 years in her son's memory, and with the hopes of finding answers. She never lost hope that justice would one day prevail. Bertie told news outlets that despite the case being stagnant and with the police seeming to lack any interest in pushing the case further, she was never going to give up searching for the truth. The crime created a deep division in their hometown, with many speculating on Jos Barton's involvement, while others dismissed this notion entirely. Nicky Verstappen's murder tore through High Bloom, leaving the community grappling with hurt and frustrations. Despite the divisions, beneath the collective pain, the shared desire for answers persisted among everyone affected by this tragic event. To quell the storm of speculation surrounding Jos Barton, his body was exhumed in 2010 and DNA samples were collected for comparison with the DNA found at the crime scene. The results definitively ruled out Barton as a match, conclusively putting an end to any suspicions surrounding him. The Verstappens were left understandably frustrated at lack of any leads in the investigation, and to that end, much of the investigation was not conducted to a high standard. Pieces of evidence were misplaced or not collected properly, including a cast of tyre tracks found near the scene which was lost. Police cordoned off the woods where Nicky's body was found, but not the camp itself, including the washrooms, which could have held some sort of evidence which could have aided in the investigation. In 2004, Peter de Vries requested a forensic re-examination of the blood specks found on Nicky's pyjamas, driven by the belief that advances in DNA technology could potentially yield new information. They discovered foreign male DNA on the pyjamas that did not belong to Verstappen, but this DNA did not match the semen found at the scene. In January of 2007, a 36-year-old man was arrested in Montreal following a string of letters which had been found on Verstappen's grave in the previous 18 months, which indicated he knew some significant information about the case. This turned out to be a cruel hoax, and the man was released. On Christmas Day of that same year, the man was arrested again for further letters and for vandalising the monument placed in memory of Verstappen. By 2019, he had vandalised the stone 3 times. He has been in and out of psychiatric facilities over the years. In 2018, the prosecution were afraid about the statute of limitations in the case expiring. Therefore, authorities announced a large-scale DNA kinship investigation, which saw over 21,000 men who lived in and around the area in 1998 having their DNA harvested for the police inquiry. During this DNA sweep, a one-of-a-kind process in the Netherlands, most men voluntarily gave samples to police. However, if they didn't respond to this request, officers would visit homes in order to convince them to give samples, given that it was a child murder case. Crucially, one of the DNA swabs revealed a familial match to the DNA found on Nicky Verstappen's pyjama bottoms, and this led police to that long-awaited breakthrough. The family granted police access to some personal belongings that belonged to the suspect, and finally, DNA was a match. Jos Brecht, a bushcrafter and wild camper, was requested to provide a DNA sample, but multiple attempts to locate him were unsuccessful. According to his family, he had moved to France in February to pursue a survivalist lifestyle, and they reported him missing 2 months later when they lost contact with him. Living in Simpelveld, 22 kilometres away from the Brunssummerhede camp at the time of Nicky's murder, Brecht was 35 years old. Police discovered his prior role as a camp leader and a disturbing incident in 1985 where he subjected 2 10-year-old boys to sexual abuse, resulting in probation since he was not convicted. Due to the lack of a conviction, Brecht's name did not appear on the sex offenders register during the initial search for potential suspects. Astonishingly, he was seen in the area at the time of the murder and stopped by police while riding a bicycle the night after, but was only questioned as a witness. Struggling to trace Brecht, police appealed to the public on August 22, 2018. Just 4 days later, a Dutch tourist recognised him near Barcelona, Spain, from media-distributed photos. Brecht was promptly arrested and extradited back to the Netherlands. Jos Brecht faced trial beginning on September 28, 2020, where he entered a plea of not guilty to all charges against him. He claimed to have come across Nicky's body during a late-night bike ride, but chose not to report it to the police due to his prior convictions. The prosecution pressed him on how his DNA ended up on Verstappen's underwear, a question to which Jos did not provide a response. Additionally, a photo presented during the trial contradicted Jos's claims, as it demonstrated that the location where Nicky's body was found would not have been visible from the path Jos asserted to have taken during his bike ride. Jos Brecht was found guilty of kidnapping and sexually assaulting Nicky, but acquitted of manslaughter due to the possibility that Brecht accidentally caused his death while attempting to silence him during the attack. Murder charges were not pursued, as there was no evidence indicating premeditation. Brecht received a 12-year prison sentence for the kidnapping and sexual abuse that resulted in the death of 11-year-old Nicky Verstappen. Additionally, he was given a further 6 months for possessing child pornography found on his laptop. In January 2022, a court of appeal convicted Brecht of manslaughter, increasing his sentence to 16 years. In September 2023, an appeal launched by Brecht's legal team was rejected by the Supreme Court, upholding his conviction. The harrowing case of Nicky Verstappen's abduction and murder unfolded over years, casting a long shadow over the High Bloom community and the Verstappen family. The initial shock and grief evolved into a prolonged quest for justice, marked by suspicions, investigations, and legal proceedings. Despite setbacks, such as false leads and individuals initially considered suspects being ruled out, the persistence of Nicky's family, the public, and law enforcement ultimately led to the identification and conviction of Jos Brecht. His conviction, increased sentence on appeal, and the rejection of further appeals brought some closure to the Verstappen family, although the scars of Nicky's tragic fate will forever endure.